There we go. Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Tracy LaMonica. I am the Policy Analyst Partnership Lead with Best Start Region 5. And Best Start Region 5 is who brings this presentation of our diversity, equity, and inclusion to you all. So we're super, super pleased that you're here with us. Can you see, Stephanie, can you see my screen?
Yes, we see it.
Great, thank you so much. So again, we're so pleased that you could be here with us this morning. This is the third session for the Engaging with Diversity, Inclusion, and Equity. And so as we get started, let me just change screens here. Welcome. We're so pleased that you could be with us. We also are very pleased to have our our interpreters with us today. We have Carmen and Carlos. So if you want to hear this presentation in Spanish, we got you covered. So I'm going to ask Carmen to give the instructions in Spanish. So if you want, you can hear it in Spanish. Carmen.
Buenos días a todos. Bienvenidos a la reunión. Si están en su laptop o una computadora, bajito en su tablero van a mirar un símbolo de un mundo y ahí mismo van a poder elegir el idioma de su preferencia. Si están en un celular o una tableta, van a mirar 3 puntitos y en esos puntitos le va a hacer clic y allí le va a salir los idiomas de preferencia. Muchas gracias.
Thank you so much, Carmen. And for those of you who may be not able to access the Google, we've got you covered as well. Here is the QR code. I'm going to put it up for a couple seconds right now. I'm also going to have it at the end of the presentation. So for those of you who are not able, I know DCFS locks down the Google Docs. This is the QR code. So you can use this with your phone, sign in. And again, please do take a moment to either sign in via the chat or sign in using the QR code, because if you're looking for the certificate or if you're looking for hours, this is the only record that we have that you're here. We're not going to be going back to watch the videos as somebody asked me to do. That's not going to be possible. So take a moment, and I'm going to leave this up here for just a couple more seconds. Get that phone out, shoot that QR code, and then sign in. And again, we'll have this QR code at the end, so don't worry, you'll see this again. So inspirational words to start the morning off. We need to remember across generations that there is as much to learn as there is to teach. Gloria Steinem, Girl Power. And today, Friday, March 3rd, is co-create a multi-generational workforce. And as always, it is my pleasure. This lady is just always rocking it. My pleasure to introduce our conversational catalyst, Danielle Johnson. So I'm going to stop sharing. Danielle, it is all yours.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday. There's a lot of happiness to go around. So I'll say a couple of things. Happy Women's History Month. That's going on. And also happy Employee Appreciation Day. So hopefully you all got some donuts or snacks or rays. That always helps for me anyway. Whatever that looks like, feel free to ask on your Employee Appreciation Day. Bear with me as I get everything going on my screen. Please let me know if you cannot hear me or see my screen. Everything looking good? Okay, perfect.
Danielle, yes, we can see it.
Awesome, okay. We have a full house today, so if there are questions or things, please feel free to raise your hand, use the chat, and I will try to track as much as I can. I know I have the amazing team on my side here to help and support if I miss a hand or a chat. So that said, we're going to jump right into co-create a multi-generational workforce. My name is Danielle Johnson. I'm serving as your conversation catalyst today. For those of you that have been here with us a few times or have been alongside the Best Start organization, you've heard my spiel. A catalyst is an event or person that causes great change. I hail from Wichita, Kansas. And in Wichita, Kansas, we have this space called the Kansas Leadership Center. They do work across the country. So if you're looking for some more leadership sort of programming, don't hesitate to look towards the KLC, although please continue to utilize me for your diversity, equity, and inclusion needs. But we do believe in engaging in leadership and leadership as an activity and not so much as a position. We all have the opportunity to lead in the places and spaces that we inhabit. So our hope is that you all feel free to utilize the term conversation catalyst and catalyze the change within your own communities and organizations as we do the DEI work. There will be some times where you all will be conversing in small groups. Just some conversational expectations for your consideration as you engage with one another today and on the larger screen. Please feel free to utilize any of the expectations that you see, because I believe that while we have a short time today, the work that you do after this workshop is going to be what's most impactful. Oftentimes we go to conferences or workshops, we're zooming into different spaces, looking to really walk away with some great information, but it is on us to get what we need when we're in these workshops. And my hope is that you are practicing and leaning into the leadership and the diversity, equity, and inclusion information we'll go over today as it pertains to a multi-generational workforce. So as a facilitator, I do reserve the right to halt discussion and maintain order. I've been in a number of discussions, all of which are oftentimes incredibly uncomfortable, folks on totally opposite sides of an issue. But what has been refreshing is our ability to discuss and maintain respect. So let's be mindful and respectful of one another today. While we might have different thoughts, values, cultures in this space, we have a very diverse space today. I ask that we be respectful and be present. I want to respect you all's time, and I want to respect the time of those on the screen as well. So as you are in those small groups, please chime in. And if you can join me on screen, please do so. I also understand folks are in different places and spaces. So if you can join me on screen or join folks on the screen when you're in your breakout rooms, that would be great as well. Lean into discomfort is what we like to share. Oftentimes we're in places and spaces of comfort, and I question the level of growth if you're walking around in comfort. So please take some time to lean in today. Wait, why am I talking? Why am I not talking? For some, they may be a little bit more introverted. Our more introverted friends, I open up the door or the floor for you to be able to share in this larger group and the smaller group when you can. For those of us that are a little bit more extroverted, I ask that you just wait a moment to let others chime in. But again, we want to make sure that we have fruitful dialogue today. One mic, one person speak at a time. Land the plane, which is one of my personal favorites. Ask your question, say your comment. We want to make sure that we are getting to the heart of what you're needing out of this workshop today. So please land the plane. And in doing so, we want to assume good intent. It's easy to say that someone's racist, sexist, homophobic, transphobic, sick, sexist. There's no shortage of obias and isms, if you will. But I really want us to value each other's time today and assume good intent as we dialogue. This is going to be treated as a learning educational space. And in this space, though, we have to remember freedom of speech is not always freedom from consequence. Sometimes we do step in it or we say the wrong thing. Intent versus impact, right? So in this space, I just ask that we're mindful. An apology goes a long way, and a willingness to change the behavior is also really impactful when we're doing DEI work. Stories stay, lessons leave. I hope that you all are able to share a little bit about yourselves and your small groups. And in doing so, we don't want to take these stories out of the space as gossip, but an opportunity to learn about the pitfalls and missteps and the successes that we all can share and learn from one another. And then prepare for intentional engagement. I would like to say, Tracy, I think we were on the same wavelength. I too have the same quotes for our mindfulness moment. So I'll underscore what was shared earlier from the Gloria Steinman. We need to remember across generation that there is much to learn and that there is to teach. So really understanding what it means to be mindful. There may be several of you that are into meditation and mindfulness practices. Sometimes folks think that that's some new trend. We know from our earliest ancestors that mindfulness is something that really helped to move communities forward and engage in being as present as possible. I think oftentimes we think that we're the great multitaskers, specifically coming off of COVID, but we're really not that great at multitasking. When we're really in the moment, paying attention and leaning in, we can actually mitigate bias when we're as present as we possibly can. So consider some mindfulness techniques, breathing, understanding, rooting your feet, rooting your body. I won't do all that. You all didn't hire me for that today, but engage in some mindfulness practices and see how some of the things in your life may change as far as your stress management and the work that you are doing. So I want to start with a quick video before we move forward. So bear with me a moment so I can make sure that everything is working appropriately. Let me know if you can't see or hear something, please. I want to make sure that you all can engage.
I'm not sure, can anybody hear? I'm not hearing any,
You're not hearing it?
No, we're not.
Okay, hold on. Oh,
but the subtitles are intact.
okay. Let's do this again. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
For not letting me get all the way through.
You're back, Danielle.
Appreciate that. Okay. Can you also see the screen?
Yes, it says multi-gen workforce. Yep, now we can hear it.
Okay, let me get that closed captioning going again.
The faces that make up the American workforce have changed dramatically over the past couple of decades.
Danielle, we can expand the video because it's still in its small form.
Generations in the same workplace. In contemporary.
All right. It's going to be that kind of day, right? With
At least it's not a Monday.
I know, right? Okay. I'm gonna try this again. All right, you see it as full screen?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Then stop a second, and you all can hear that.
Yep,
Good.
Okay. One more little click. We will have subtitles. If you all are praying people, prayers or positive affirmations will help.
Make up the American workforce have changed dramatically over the past couple of decades. Unlike in past years that generally only had 3 different generations in the same workplace, in contemporary times, that number has increased to 5 or 6 generations in the same workplace. This increase has resulted in workplaces having a wider range of expectations that differ depending on age. That doesn't mean that this shift is a bad thing. According to a 2018 Randstad Work Monitor study, 86% of global workers prefer working on a multi-generational team. Before we continue any further, it should be clarified that every individual born in a certain generation does not necessarily fit into the broad characteristics defining that generation. Broad characteristics cannot be attributed to every individual.
My name is Beth Livingston, and I'm an assistant professor of management and entrepreneurship at the Tippie College of Business at the University of Iowa. Kaleidoscope career model says that there are 3 different things that we care about over our careers, which is that we care about challenge, we care about balance, and we care about authenticity. And that the degree to which we care about each of these things shifts and change over time, just like a kaleidoscope. The 3 colors never change, but the combinations do. And it's an attempt to get us to acknowledge that, you know, people will always care about challenge, balance, and authenticity, but at different degrees. And we can meet people where they are and create policies that allow people to spend their entire careers at the same company and getting what they need. Because what we tend to see is, for instance, if you're just new from school, it's challenge, challenge, challenge all the time. And then there's a hypothesized sort of divergence for men and women, where women move into balance before men do because of children-related issues, although that has changed as men have begun to do more parenting. And then authenticity is something interesting, as we see, for instance, men often move into the desire for authenticity in their retirement years. And I'm going to leave this career and I'll try to do something that's really me, authentically me, that I care about, that I value. And women who move into entrepreneurial positions often do that from a place of authenticity and balance. You know, there's sort of differentiations there.
Having negative opinions between generations isn't a new idea. In the 8th century BC, Hesiod wrote, "I see no hope for the future of our people. They are dependent on the frivolous youth of today." To this day, generational discrimination continues with jokes like "Okay Boomer" or comments like "Millennials all need participation trophies." In many workplaces, comments like these often get a pass and are not reprimanded as being insensitive or discriminatory like racist or sexist comments are. Leaders in an organization need to take steps to let their employees know that generational discrimination will not be tolerated. Companies that allow workplace cultures that shame generations make it a less inclusive environment for different generations of workers. This can lead to a higher turnover and less competitive ability to hire new employees, both young and old.
If we don't acknowledge that and we put in these blanket policies, we're not going to meet people where they are. We're not going to be able to keep them in our organizations for long periods of time because their needs differ and their needs change and shift. So what I need when I'm 25 years old and I didn't have any children was different than me at 39 with 2 children, which will be different when I'm 64 and I'm still excited for different challenges. And so the degree to which you can have flexible policies that almost serve in the sort of buffet style where people can put together things that help them to do their jobs well, and that acknowledge differentiation without putting a value judgment on that, but your reward is greater, and that you can get people who are committed for longer because they'll feel supported throughout their career. They don't have to leave you to go somewhere else.
All right, thank you for putting up with me and my technological challenges. Again, throughout this workshop, I really want to underscore the importance of there will be some overlaying statements made. Some of those statements might not apply to you, or you might say, I fall into that generation, but that's not my experience. I always want to remember the intersections of culture, where we're from, where we come from, what we do, how we show up. And so again, not to be offensive in any way, but just also making sure that we understand when we're talking generationally, for some of us, we might not fit the overlaying statements that may be made throughout the training today. So want to make sure I honor and uplift that. As we move forward, you're actually going to hop into your first breakout, and I want you all to engage in some conversation around the following. Share what you've experienced in working in a multi-generational workforce, what has been challenging and what has been rewarding. You all will be in rooms of about 6 or 8 people, so please leave space for folks to lean in. I do hope that you all have some really great dialogue, and we'll hear from a couple of other folks when you come back in. But again, those are your questions. Share your experience about working in a multi-generational workforce and what has been challenging and what has been rewarding. Stephanie, if you want to break them out for about 8 minutes so they can engage.
Yes, opening them up right now.
Thank you. All right, welcome back, everyone. I hope you all had some good discussions. I would love to hear from just a couple of folks to share, what's going on in your workspaces, what's been the most challenging, and what would you say is the most rewarding?
Hi, this is Patty. What I found, what we discussed as far as challenging, I am a baby boomer, and what I find challenging is, and working with a wide range of age ranges in our agency, I didn't grow up with technology. I had to learn it. As the younger generation, they were born into it. So what I'm finding is I'm finding what's really rewarding is learning from them, like TikTok. I had no idea. And so I've been working with a gal here on TikTok, and it's been really rewarding. But also what I find rewarding too is that I can learn from the younger generation, they're learning from me, and it's a nice balance.
Hey, I love that. Thank you, Patty, for sharing that, right? Technology is a big one in this time frame when we think about just generationally where we've come, where we're going. And I'm a millennial in this space, and I'm certainly, I can do some things, but clearly I couldn't share a video a moment ago. So there's that, right? Think about technology and our abilities. So grace goes a long way. Can I hear from maybe one other person?
I can share, Marcella, and thank you, Patty. I love doing TikTok with you. Our group was really good. Like, we all kind of had the same idea that we can pick up the wisdom from any generation that we work with, because their wisdom at 20 might be different from my wisdom at 20 to 40 to 30 to whatever age group. And so there's always so much to learn. One of the ladies did mention that she liked the fact that the newer generation, I don't even know what they're called, Gen Z, right?
Yeah.
I think, yeah, like they're really challenging the norms and what was set in place, and that it's a good lesson for anyone who wasn't born in that generation that, you know, sometimes things do need to be challenged. So Steph brought that up, and that was like a really good point about working with different generations and how it's opening up all of us and not just that particular age group.
Absolutely. Thank you. Dr. Sutton, I think I saw you speaking.
I was, and I realized I was on mute. The one thing I did mention, another colleague in the group, sometimes I'm the only one referred to as ma'am in the group because with the younger generations. So I allow them, you know, please call me Cheryl, you know, but I also say if it's a cultural thing or generational thing, they just feel they have to do that, I accept that as well. I'm not hard pressed about being called Cheryl, Dr. Sutton, Miss Sutton, or whatever. But just open to, you know, it's not just about my culture or what I grew up with, but some just insist on calling me ma'am or Dr. Sutton. So as long as you don't call me late for lunch, I'm good.
Thank you for that.
All right.
I think I saw TD unmute. No. Okay, we'll keep on rolling. And again, I do think it is important when we think about, Dr. Sutton, you brought up a big thing too, is right, we do have multi-generational workforce, but we also have a multicultural workforce. And those things do intersect. So while the focus today is generations, we will kind of talk about things in a nuanced way. I grew up, my dad came from Birmingham, Alabama. And yes, sir, yes, ma'am, no, sir, is very much in my vocabulary and something I've passed down to my children. But I've always told my children, if someone doesn't want you to call them that, stop calling them that. Be respectful. So, right, respect is always in tangent when we have these types of discussions. Go ahead, TD, I see your hand is raised.
Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
All right, so that's that technology piece. Anyway, so gonna try to be transparent here. I think I'm 42, I think. And so I'm like on a weird kind of cusp, right? So I think I'm like a millennial, but it's another generation after that, you know, so I'm like weird there. But anyway, so I find it very rewarding. I can work with older and younger generations, but there's always a caveat. So I love working with the older generations, or those boomers, as we like to call them, because of their wisdom and their experience. And I like to glean from that. But I also like to work with generations younger than me because of their creativity and their ambition. But, you know, with both, there's limitations. So with the older generation, sometimes they're so committed and so married to the process that sometimes they're a little stubborn in some regards. And then sometimes with the younger generation, because you're so ambitious and, you know, you want to go, you're not really thinking through the process, you know, so that could be a challenge as well. So that's my story.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. You got some nuggets in there, right? When we think about how we work multi-generationally. Thank you all for engaging with one another in your small groups and kind of sharing out in this larger space. So let's move this kind of new space. I want you all to take some time to think about influencers. As I'm talking, please type in the chat, who do you consider to be major influencers? When you think about the term influencers, who are those folks? I'm going to give you a little bit of definition here in this space. Feel free again to use the chat to talk about who you believe are major influencers in your life, in your walk, across the country, whatever that may look like. Influencer, people and organizations who possess an expert level of knowledge and or social influence in their respective fields, sometimes referred to as a key opinion leader. So feel free to start typing in those chats who those folks are for you. Start to see them coming through here. Feel free to utilize names as well. Who are those key influencers? And then also we're seeing an influencer marketing change and shift within the workspace. So what does that look like? A form of social media marketing involving endorsements from influencers. So celebrities, but not in my life in general, managers, pastors, mentors, right? Oprah, CEOs. So I'm seeing a couple of things come into the chat. I want to, again, just kind of use this as a quick activity. I'm going to show you a screen of folks that are considered when you type in top influencers in 2023. I also want to be mindful of this, maybe more of the US perspective, the American perspective of what we're starting to see folks as influencers as. You might know some of these faces. This might be random to you, but I want to kind of talk through this as we think about generationally what an influencer might be. We have Cristiano Ronaldo, soccer player, up here on the top corner. Selena Gomez, singer, actress. Kylie Jenner, reality TV star, entrepreneur. Lionel Messi, soccer player. The Rock, Dwayne Johnson, used to be a wrestler, now turned actor, entrepreneur. Some of you may be shaking your head like, I don't even know who these folks are, or why would they be considered influencers, right? Depending where you sit generationally, these folks may mean something to you and these folks may mean literally nothing to you. Some of you might be asking, where's Beyonce, right? Really depends on what you believe to be your influencer. I utilize this for us to consider, again, what it means to be in a multi-generational workplace, more in jest, of course, but when I talk to my father, I think about my family members, they would say folks like Dr. Martin Luther King, right? So think about if social media existed during the civil rights movement or some of our larger movements, who would be our trending people? And how does that connect? And what we might consider as baseless for one generation was also thought of the same in other spaces and generations too. So being mindful of what influencing looks like within our own organizations and companies. Again, this is more of an in-jest sort of way of thinking, but these folks do have literally millions of followers on their platforms, whether we agree with it or not. You might look it up and see how many folks believe that these folks are who is shaping the next generation, if you will. That being said, what I want us to consider is, what does that workforce look like? When we talk about a multi-generational workforce, and some of you all, we heard it a little bit like, oh, well, what generation do I fall in? So the labor or workforce are people ages 16 and older who are either working or actively looking for work. This does exclude active duty military personnel and the institutionalized population, such as prison inmates, when we think about what's counted in labor statistics. Currently, the workforce includes traditionalists or the silent generation, those folks born before 1945. Then we have baby boomers, 1946 to 64, Generation X, 1965 to 1981, millennials, 1982 to 96. And this right now is the largest group in the workforce currently. Then you have Generation Z. There was a couple of names floating around prior to landing on Generation Z. So you might have heard iGen, post-millennials. And that is looking like 1996 to potentially 2010, 2012. And then coming soon to a workplace near you, Generation Alpha, that comes after Generation Z, 2010 to 2012-ish, in the beginning of those years to about 2024. Now, depending on where you look, you may see shifts in the beginning or the ending of certain years. But this is generally how, when we think about our generations, how they're basically categorized. So take some time to feel free to rep your generation, drop in the chat where you fall on this spectrum. I shared earlier that I am a millennial. And just for common language, because it's always important for us to root ourselves in talking about things in the same way, a generation is considered a group of people who witness the same historical events and have had similar sociological influences, a group of people who are living at the same time and are within a certain age range. And sometimes it's referred to as a cohort. So when you're thinking about generation, this is where those overlaying statements come from, because we are packing all of these folks into this generation based on historical views, what's happening during your time frame. Let's think about what's happening during our time frame with COVID and how that's impacted us within the generation and how that's going to impact our generations moving forward. And then just remembering that we do have those generational differences. So I see some things coming in the chat. We're certainly multi-generational on the screen as well. So what are some of those gaps? What are we seeing? The generational gap in the workspace is broadly speaking, the differences in behaviors and outlook between the groups, and really thinking about people who were born at distinctly different times. Each generation grows up in a different context and as a result may have different work expectations. For instance, and again, overlaying statements, members of the silent generation are typically depicted as being more fiscally conservative, while baby boomers may show more liberal fiscal tendencies, and Gen Zers are heavily tech reliant and comfortable using social media platforms while older generations may prefer the other forms of communication, or what we might consider more traditional forms of communication. So again, just those gaps based on what was available during the time you were growing up. Just some little pieces here. I won't necessarily focus on each generation as we move forward, because we want to learn how to work across generation. But oftentimes we hear that Generation X is the generation that can really bridge gaps between those that are baby boomers and those that are millennials, and kind of tying into Generation Z, as those folks have grown up in an interesting time frame. And so being able to kind of speak the language across generations, what we see here in common with millennials, Gen X and millennials, that digital savviness to some degree, eagerness to lead, and driven by purpose. And then when we look on the other side, in common with boomers and Generation X, employer loyalty, virtual team leaders, execution focused, identifying and developing talent. And then when you look towards the middle, that thing that's kind of unique for Generation X, strong desire for external mentoring and development, and confident leading with empathy. And we're starting to see more Generation X actually get into that leadership space on the job, really depending on where you're at. Some other really important labor statistics I would like to share, as you kind of see on the screen here. By 2024, which is all of next year, time is flying, right? Bureau of Labor Statistics projects that the labor force will grow to about 164 million people. That number includes about 41 million people who will be aged 55 and older, of whom about 13 million are expected to be ages 65 and older. In 2024, baby boomers will have reached ages 60 to 78, and some of them are expected to continue working even after they qualify for Social Security retirement benefits. I won't go into the political nature of Social Security, but some folks will have to continue to work because maybe the savings just aren't there. So also weighing out that I have to, because it's a necessity to continue to move forward and provide for my household and myself. And those that might just be living longer and want to continue or get into that kind of third, fourth, fifth leg of their career. Some of those reasons why folks are working a little bit longer is longer life expectancy to previous generations. We've seen some really great advances in technology and medicine. And so folks are living a little bit longer, but that also means dollars are running out quicker. So that those savings plans, whatever that can look like, if you have the privilege to save, that's something to consider, as that really weighs out how long you may have to work. And some of those creative retirement incentives that organizations are starting to look at. Some other things for consideration, the Development Dimensions International and EY Ernst & Young. These are two groups that try to keep a handle on what's going on in our multi-generational workforce. They report and showcase more than 25,000 leaders spanning 54 countries and 26 major industry sectors, found that Generation X now accounts for 51% of leadership roles globally, with an average of 20 years of workplace experience, and they're primed to quickly assume nearly all top executive roles. So again, just thinking about how things are beginning to shift. Generation X aren't typically considered digital natives, although they do kind of have some of that crossover, as we saw earlier. So it really depends on what year in which you were born. And again, also overlaying statement, there are some folks that are just really, really technologically savvy anyway, regardless of age. All right, if you're willing to work and learn, you 9 times out of 10 are able to really get in and engage with what you are learning. It says some 54% of Gen X and 56% of millennials reported that they are, in fact, digitally savvy. So we talked a little bit about Generation Z. I'm gonna play this video clip for you all so you get an opportunity, everyone, to kind of hear and see where we're at with Generation Z as far as what's been collected on the data front side. And give me a moment to make sure that closed captioning is going.
Generations are really about cultural change. By studying generations, we can get an idea.
My apologies, I don't know why the closed captioning is not coming. Can you all hear that video though?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Let's see if my closed captioning is going to populate.
Looking specifically at numbers.
All right.
Generations are really about cultural change. By studying generations, we can get an idea of how growing up now as a child or a teen is different from it was for, say, the Gen Xers growing up in the 80s or the Boomers growing up in the 1960s.
Looking specifically at numbers, we define Gen Z as those born between 1995 and 2012.
1995 just happens to be the year the internet was commercialized, so that also captures the generation of people who were born after the internet existed, who don't know a world without the internet. Compared to previous generations, they spend a lot more time communicating with their friends electronically, and they also spend less time hanging out with their friends in person.
My generation, we're truly digital natives. We've really only known a world where our phones are smart. You know, we turn to technology for a lot of things, whether it be entertainment, research, education. It's truly just part of who we are.
I'm not entirely convinced that iGen's skill with social media is going to be a complete positive. It's also linked to depression and anxiety and unhappiness, especially for people who are spending too much time on social media, who are comparing themselves to others too much.
You know, people always talk about taking digital detoxes and stepping away for a little bit, and I don't know if it's necessarily cutting out the phone for a month at a time, but understanding that it's okay to put down your phone for a couple hours, don't have it at the dinner table, try not to be on your phone right before bed. There's just time and a place for everything, and I think understanding that is really important.
I think something that parents can do to help with this anxiety that phones and information overload is really helping them sort of analyze and prioritize the information is what we find is something that's definitely needed with this generation.
At the moment, what many people think of when they think of iGen is a teen or a young adult, looking at his or her phone. But I think they'll become known for other things as time goes on.
One of our traits that, is very upfront with my generation is that we're very, very realistic. At a young age, we were thrown into a world that you could say wasn't the prettiest. We grew up amongst the 2009 recession after 9/11, and our parents didn't tell us we could necessarily be whatever we wanted. They told us that it's a hard world out there, you're gonna have to work your butt off, and if you're not willing to, there's plenty of others that will.
Gen Z entering the workforce, it's gonna be a lot of change. For Gen Z, if I can log on and log in, I'm at work. So I think the physical office is really gonna be challenged. Another thing that we know about this generation they're really gonna challenge is the pace at which things get done. And everyone talks about work-life balance. I got my work and my life, and work's from 9 to 5, and then your life, and how do we balance the two? What I love about Gen Z is they just don't think it works, and it really hasn't worked. What they go for is work-life blend, where work and life are 7 days a week, 24 hours a day.
By spring of their senior year, iGen teens are less likely, compared to previous generations, to have their driver's license, to work at a paid job, to go out on dates, to drink alcohol. And we've already seen this with millennials in young adulthood, taking longer to settle into careers, to marry, to have children, and so on. So the whole developmental trajectory is slowed down.
Gen Z is by far the most diverse generation ever, and we're also the most interconnected around the globe. And part of the reason is, now with our generation, when something happens, the entire world finds out immediately through social media, through hashtags. We're always connected to each other, so we feel as though whether it happened in the same building or 1,000 miles away, it is immediately affecting us because we hear about it, and so we feel obligated to help and be a part of the situation, whether it's positive or negative.
They are also the one that values equality the most, whether we're talking about race or gender or sexual orientation or transgender issues. They're really much more open and focused on equality.
We really do not fear failure, so whether it be...
All right. I want to finish that total video, but again, just an opportunity to get a glimpse of Generation Z and kind of where we're growing. They're already in the workforce at this point. And so understanding that engagement across the multi-generational spectrum is important. Again, I keep going back to the overlaying statements. Let's also be mindful of socioeconomic status and how that intersects in this space. When we talk digital natives, let's also remember during the COVID shutdown, schools were shut down, and we saw a large gap in accessibility to broadband internet. A number of schools, municipalities, governmental bodies had to pump dollars into technological upgrades to send laptops, tablets home. Kids were tuning into school on prepaid smartphones. So also understanding that there are caveats to the idea of being more technologically savvy, but also having access to technology to actually engage. So depending on where you fall, what is that access for a young person or your family to actually be able to engage as a digital native by way of actually having the resource to be a digital native? I just want to add that in as we think about how technology plays and shows up in this space. Let me move this forward. So some trends that are affecting the multi-generational workforce at this moment. We have the rise of work and the decline of employment. We oftentimes are hearing we have a labor shortage, and many of the workforce studies and projections that were created prior to COVID had all of these kind of different projections, but the pandemic really shook up the world market as it pertains to those that are in the workspace. There was this growth of a movement called quiet quitting and the Great Resignation. And consider or reflect where you fall on this. When you hear the term quiet quitting, it's the employees who put no more extra effort into the job than they absolutely have to. You clock in, you clock out, you call it a day. You're quietly quitting, but you haven't left, you need the paycheck. That kind of came in 21, 22, and we're still seeing it in 23. And then when we think about the Great Resignation, a number of folks that in fact left their job voluntarily, understanding that I have an opportunity to start over. Many of us were sitting right at home trying to figure things out. But again, caveat, there were some of our workers who had to be in the workplace given the work that they were providing. So thinking about how that has since shaped the workforce. And it continues to change in the landscape when we think about climate and culture of the organization and upkick in diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives across the country in the workplace, increased use of new technologies from maybe co-working space, cloud-based work, folks and organizations totally getting away from paper, and how that intersects actually with being a little bit more environmentally friendly. And so we're seeing some of those changes, increased expectation for work-life flexibility. And I think we all can engage with what that means as a caregiver, just given the term of caregiver, maybe not just you as a parent, but aging parent, working with family members that have disabilities. So how you have to be on the clock and how you're actually having to work with family, and how we saw that intersect when we were working from home. And so a lot of folks really are looking for that flexibility in their workspace, and they're not afraid to leave their jobs to find other things. And we're also seeing businesses go totally hybrid, particularly in the HR realm, where you can work from anywhere in the world and ensure that you're actually pushing out what is necessary for your organization. Increased expectation for continual development. People are wanting to continue to get certifications and trying to do what they need to do to be helpful in their workspace. Increased need for new ways to reward and recognize employees. Increased needs to engage the entire workforce. Emphasis on innovation. Need for workforce talent development. And we're seeing an upkick in skills-based hiring, also known as upskilling or reskilling. Before we saw in the workforce where we were really heavily leaning, stating that you needed a college degree of some sort to come into the workforce. We're seeing some organizations now make that shift, that we are willing to train and teach folks because we need bodies now. We need to backfill roles. And that's something for you to consider as you're thinking about weighing out universities. And universities right now are looking at ensuring, what are we doing to make sure folks feel like they need an education to get a job? So there's a lot of shifts happening in our climate as we speak. And I believe in the both and, right? As someone, I've gotten my bachelor's and my master's in public administration, but there's also this ability to say, we need to have people on the job, and we don't have time to wait for 4, 8, 10, 15 years for you to be able to work here. I need you now. So how are we getting folks certified and getting folks, particularly when we think about the trades, when a lot of folks were pushed into the university setting, we missed some of those trade skills because we didn't push people into those spaces. So understanding what that can look like. And we're also going back to that innovation. People are really learning how to work with different populations. How are we helping and working alongside our immigrant population? Educating and ensuring that those exiting the prison population are able to get back in the workforce. I recently sat in a presentation and someone said, we don't have a labor shortage, we have an imagination problem. How are we engaging the populations that exist with us every day and getting them in the workforce as quickly as we can? Another thing that we've witnessed and that has also really shaped and changed the workforce is the idea of what it means to be an entrepreneur, or getting away from even a company platform. So when we think about the organizational man era, so you have your company, you have your workers, and then you have your customer output, whatever that looks like. Maybe it's a product, a service. But we're seeing an unbundled workforce where there's a platform. What do I mean by that? Uber, Etsy, YouTube, places and spaces where you can work, but you're not actually going in and out of a physical company or space. You work for a company per se, but you are more mobile and on the go. A 2017 McKinsey Global Institute study showed that 20 to 30% of the working age population in the US was engaged in independent work. And that proportion of such work mediated by digital platforms like Uber, Etsy was growing rapidly. This trend spans the gamut from individuals who convert their passions into professions, YouTubers, podcasters, gamers. I don't know, for those of you that might have some little ones in your household, if you're ever watching what they're watching and they're watching other people play games, or they're watching YouTubers unbox something, those folks are getting paid, right? So when you think about young people and when they think about a traditional job, I hear my daughter say, I want to be a YouTuber. Think about what that does to our landscape and the ability to change how we, in fact, are engaging in a multi-generational workforce. And again, TikTokers, we may feel some type of way about them, but they are getting paid. So think about just how much the labor force has in fact changed and what folks have access to. So what are some of the solutions to working across a generational, multi-generational workforce? Adaptive leadership. We are seeing folks having to truly adapt, and the one size fits all doesn't always work in a workplace. You can create a culture with values and norms, but we have to make sure that we're understanding what does a universal design look like for the people that we're working alongside. Utilize multiple ways of communication, and ensuring when you introduce a new technology or a new platform that you're not making assumptions of who is going to get it versus how can I ensure that everyone gets it? That's where those sessions come in of stop by this workshop so that we know that you know how to utilize Office Outlook. Don't assume that everyone knows how to utilize the work platforms that you're on. You may be providing some one-on-one support. Maybe you are finding out those folks that are really, really great at the technology or really, really great at the platform that you're in, and you have some ambassadors that are working alongside your organization to ensure folks are just as successful in working within platform. Host collaborative decision-making and problem-solving discussion. You know, when you have your table of decision makers, who's usually not at the table? If you're making decisions for a group of people, who are you including to help make those decisions? And how are you including those that are impacted by the policies, practices, and procedures that you're putting in place in your workplace? Create opportunities for engagement outside of the workplace. Many of us spend most of our lives on a job, right? So oftentimes your work space becomes your work family. So how are you engaging to really get to know one another in that space? And what are those opportunities for pairing, social outings and gatherings, whatever that may be, to actually grow rapport and relationship? And then again, looking past the generational stereotypes, because there are the generational stereotypes. You heard that in the first video where they kind of talked about some of the things like saying millennials just are the me generation or okay boomer. While some of these things may be said in jest, they are actually hurtful to those that are receiving or on the receiving end of some of the stereotypes and or the microaggressions. Involving different generations at all levels of planning to cultivate a culture of collaboration. How are you all looking at your strategic planning? The review of your policies. Oftentimes our policies and procedures inadvertently or inadvertently leave people out from being able to join your workforce. What are some of the certifications or things that you're saying that people need, and really addressing, do they need those things or are these teachable skills? looking at your hierarchy and your leadership and understanding who can and would be best to serve in those spaces. Dress codes, understanding what that looks like. And then succession planning is important all the time. When we think about folks that are going to start aging out of the workforce, we also unfortunately saw a number of untimely deaths because of COVID and some of the underlying sicknesses folks had. So that also rocked the way our workforce looked, because we were planning a time frame for people to actually exit out. And unfortunately, we saw a drastic change because we experienced extreme loss in the workforce as well. So at any time you can succession plan and make sure that you're saving things and ensuring that folks are properly onboarded, that really helps to support the work that you're doing in your spaces. And then creating a culture of emotional intelligence. And I like to think that emotional intelligence and psychological safety is something that actually will bridge the gap in a multi-generational and multicultural workforce. And before I go into that as an added additional response to working across and co-creating a multi-generational workforce, I want to get us back in breakout groups again for about 8 minutes. And in this, I want you all to discuss and share if you've already implemented strategies in your spaces. Maybe some of the ones I've shared you're already doing, or there's something new. What's been challenging about some of those implementations? And what has been the best strategy for your organization? Because I like to believe that while I'm here in front of the screen, you all probably have some amazing things that you're already doing that someone else needs to hear to implement within their organization. So what has been the best strategy for your organization already in trying to bridge the divide in a multi-generational workforce? And if you've done nothing, what do you want to try based on some of the things that were shared already today? All right, welcome back. We'll let the screen continue to populate. I hope that you all had some time to just kind of learn from one another. Really, that was a space for you all to engage, to talk about what you might consider implementing, or what's going well already on your jobs, right? Again, that learning from each other. We are a multi-generational, multicultural screen right now, so get what you can from one another. And please make sure that also, if you heard something that you want to continue, because again, small groups, use the chat or direct message each other in the chat to really continue to lean into some of those thoughts and ideas for your organization. So I kind of left off with the question about emotional intelligence. I want to lean into this space for a little bit in our next kind of 10, 15 minutes. What is emotional intelligence? So really recognizing and understanding and managing our own emotions, recognizing and understanding and influencing the emotions of others. Emotional intelligence is a set of abilities that can be measured, learned, practiced, and mastered. And then you'll also hear me say EI allows us to choose how we want to respond and behave. Sometimes you'll hear EI as EQ, emotional quotient. That's kind of how that language started before it became emotional intelligence. Managers, and those aren't even managers, but just those on the job are better equipped for conflict management, their difficult feedback, direct communication that embodies accountability and empathy. Those are two main things that we have to consider when we are in the workspaces. What does accountability and empathy look like? Having those tough discussions and leaning into them, but also doing so respectfully. The American Psychological Association showcases several studies found strong associations between leaders with strong emotional intelligence help drive change and have visionary leadership. When leadership models EI, it opens the doors for teams and members to engage in a higher level of EI as well. And then emotional intelligence is a predictor for multicultural competence. So again, that intersection between empathy, understanding, and how you engage with a diverse workforce, because we are in fact a diverse workforce. We might be missing some facets, right? You may be more women heavy than men. You may have more women of color in a space, or maybe you're more predominantly white, whatever that might look like. Those are things that are showing up in our workspace, and how do we work across culture? And so leaning into embracing emotional intelligence as a response to a multi-generational workforce and a multicultural workforce. Some things to consider is management of self, relationships, team environment. How are you working on your mindfulness, and how do you mitigate bias and assumptions? You can't totally get rid of bias. I think folks think you can just rooted out. It's a part of your natural processing in your brain. It's when it becomes harmful and you start to leave people out, leave resources out, take things away from folks based on age, race, ethnicity, gender, the intersections of who someone is. That is when these things become problematic. So what's important for us to understand? Think about what you know, what you do, self and others. What is that self-awareness? How does that connect to your social awareness? How does that connect to your relationship management? And then self-management. All of these things connect when we think about emotional intelligence and what you're experiencing and how you're mitigating some of those things as you're working through, oftentimes just conflict. Being able to manage basic conflict can be very hard for folks. And when we think about just generationally how those things come up, it's important for us to understand how we mitigate some of those pieces. This ties into psychological safety. So what is psychological safety? Again, just some common language. The shared belief that the team is safe for interpersonal risk-taking. Members are comfortable admitting mistakes or bringing up difficult topics. The team learns from their errors together. It creates a safe environment where members openly share ideas with a sense of confidence that a team will not embarrass, reject, or punish someone for speaking up. So think about the environments that you're inhabiting and what's going on in those spaces, and how you're engaging in those spaces. This is my last video clip that I'm a fan of Simon Sinek, and he has some pretty interesting things that he shared.
I think some people turn off the.
Give me 1 second. I'm gonna get my closed captioning in.
I think some people turn off the humanity when they go to work.
I did have my closed captioning. Thank you all for your patience with my inclusive video work here.
You know, they may be, you know, loving parents and loving friends and loving, you know, children to their own parents, and yet for some reason there's a switch that they think that that's irresponsible to do at work. Now, I'm not talking about necessarily wearing your heart on your sleeve every day. There is something called emotional professionalism. You know, if you're having a bad day, you can say, listen, I'm a little off my game today, but you can't sit in a meeting with your arms folded and be grumpy and give one-word answers. That's emotionally unprofessional. You know, you can have hard feelings, but you can't go around screaming and yelling at people. You know, you can have, so I think there is emotional professionalism. But I think for some reason, especially as people make their way up the ranks, they think that expressing any kind of emotion is a sign of weakness. Even that word vulnerability, we talk, you know, it's such a common word now being talked about in the business world that you have to be vulnerable. To this day, it makes some people feel very uncomfortable. I don't want to be vulnerable. Well, all vulnerability means is saying things like, I don't know, or I need help, or I'm overwhelmed, or can you help me do this because I don't know how to do this, or I've been promoted to a position where maybe I need more training. And the reason we're afraid of saying that is for fear that it makes us look weak, which will then damage our careers. The reality is the total opposite. By saying I don't know means someone can help us. But instead we choose to lie, hide, and fake very often, which eventually gets revealed. Enough stress piled on that lying, hiding, and faking collapses either professionally or personally. We either feel the stress or the projects that we're working on start to go haywire. And very often when we get to those points, everybody knows anyway. The amazing thing that I've learned is when you say, can somebody help me? We're surrounded by people who would love to help us. They just didn't think we needed it because we acted as if we didn't. So I think a large part of it is quite frankly fear. Fear that if I express these things, that people will think I'm not qualified for my job, where the opposite is true. And remember, when you are in a position of leadership, you don't actually have to be better at doing the job that the people you lead. You have to be responsible for taking care of them to make sure they're good at their job. But for some reason, we think that I have to be better than you at your own job because I'm the leader. Completely false. I just have to make sure that you're equipped, you have the tools, the training, and the psychological safety to be the best you can be, even if it's better than me.
All right. How does that connect this work, right? When we create environments or places for folks to be able to thrive, regardless of age or background, they will. So how do we engage and how are we looking at our emotional intelligence and psychological safety? I just want you to be reflective in this moment and think about the spaces that you work. And take this quick audit and answer these questions for yourself. If you make a mistake on the team that you're on, will it be held against you? Are the members of the team able to bring up problems and tough issues? Do people on the team sometimes reject others for being different? Is it safe to take risks on your team? Is it difficult to ask other members of the team for help? And would anyone on the team deliberately act in a way that undermines efforts? In thinking about that and in reflecting, think about how you show up in those spaces yourself and how your team shows up. And this is where we see some of those gaps, right? If I can't be honest, if I can't engage, I'm not going to be willing to learn, or I'm going to put myself in a position where I can't grow because I'm afraid to talk to someone about what's going on in my workspace. So just kind of thinking about those things and reflecting. What can you do to create a space that has psychological safety, or a space where folks feel like they can show up? Consider 360 assessments. Create opportunities for feedback from various reporting lines. Find out the stories that are told about you. You might think you're doing a great job on the job, but how do other folks feel about your leadership, your partnership, you as a colleague? And sometimes those might be informal. Hey, give me some feedback on how I communicate with you all, or how could I have said that better, or how am I showing up? And being open to taking that feedback and those critiques and potential criticisms. Consistent engagement, questions to engage your team, engage your colleagues. What's one thing I can do better to support you this week? How does your workload feel right now? Where can I help? What projects have you enjoyed the most over the past year? As you engage and get to know your colleagues and create spaces for folks to build relationships and rapport and trust, you want to be able to build trust in the places and spaces that you're working. Selective vulnerability, engage in trust building, but be mindful of oversharing and trust destroying habits. If someone has shared something with you that needs to stay with you, it's not your job to tell the whole office about what someone is going through. You can kill the trust in an office or in an organization, be it corporate, nonprofit, whatever it is, by being messy and gossipy versus listening, engaging, and encouraging your coworkers to be able to thrive in the workspace. So continue to create the space for those safety pieces, sharing information about your personal work style and preferences, encouraging teammates to do the same, be available and approachable to teammates, make time for those ad hoc one-on-ones, those conversations, feedback sessions, career coaching, if you will. Clearly communicate the purpose of your meetings. Clear is kind. I love that. If you're a Brene Brown fan or whatever you're into, clear is kind. And making sure that before someone walks away, they understand what you have shared or what the task is at hand. Express gratitude for contributions of your team, being graceful and gracious in a space. Solicit input, opinions, and feedback on projects, your work, the work of others. How do you draw people in to the work that you're engaged in? Not interrupting others, right? Stepping in when someone is interrupted, ensuring colleagues' ideas are heard, the appropriate folks are credited for the work that they're putting in. Be aware of your body language, leaning into folks when they're speaking. These are just basic 101 things. Put the phone down, engage with me person to person. Those things matter when you're in relationship with someone, when you're in dialogue. I want to know that my time that I'm giving to you on the job, at the lunch, the meeting, the board meeting, whatever that is being respected. And then I say this in every training, and I'll continue to do so, a lifelong commitment to learning and critical self-reflection when we think about cultural humility, learning more about your culture and those around you and how to engage with tact and respect, institutional accountability and mutual respectful partnerships based on trust. Oftentimes you might not have trust in the space, and that might be the root of the issues in your workspace. Something to consider as we kind of end our day to day, when you reflect, what can you do to generate greater psychological safety in your workspace? What approaches should you prioritize, and what is a commitment you'll make in the next month, the next few months, to enhance the safety and the accountability in your multi-generational workspaces? What is your job? What do you need to do to be able to create spaces that folks feel like they can enter into and thrive and engage as their full authentic self? Some resources to learn more about emotional intelligence, and these slides will be made available to you right? You could also take some time learning more about the generations, but I don't like to focus on the differences of the generations because difference always exists. Difference in culture, difference in age, difference in socioeconomic status, right? So you could spend time learning more about how do I connect with this baby boomer, or you could actually take the time to connect with the people that are on the job with you day in and day out through meaningful conversations, meaningful opportunities, and creating spaces for folks to feel like they can thrive alongside you. If you have any questions, we have about 4 minutes. I'm going to turn it back over to Tracy to close us out. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you so much. And Danielle, we did have a question in the chat about receiving the presentations. Yes, usually Danielle will send me those presentations. I will then send it to the group. And so, yes, you will be receiving that. I'm just going to take about 1 more minute of your time. Let me just get this ready. And Danielle, I can see you. Can you see my screen?
I can, yeah.
Okay, great. So if we can get an actual or a virtual round of applause for our facilitator extraordinaire, Danielle Johnson. Thank you so much. I saw a lot of comments in the chats going on that people found it very useful, very informative. So thank you so much. We will be meeting again in 2 weeks. Our next session will be Friday, March 17th, Gender, Diversity, Inclusion. So again, you don't need to write anything down. You'll get that email a week out, a day out, and usually an hour or two before. So be on the lookout for those emails, and it is the same link. So finally, I know a lot of people put in the chat, good morning, hello, we love to hear from you. But again, if you're wanting to get any sort of certificate or hours for this, we do need to have you sign in. So I'm going to put this right up for a couple seconds. If you are a part of DCFS, I know DCFS locks down their Google Docs, so you can just scan this with your phone and sign in that way. Or my colleague Stephanie probably already did it before I said it because she's on top of it. The sign-in sheet is in the chat. So yeah, Stephanie's always on top of it. So if you can look to the chat, and again, I'll leave that there for a couple seconds and let everybody get that code. And then finally, thank you so much. We appreciate it. We hope you're enjoying this journey as we go through these 6 sessions with Danielle. Happy Friday to everyone. I know it's going to be chilly in the AV for those of us in Antelope Valley, so bundle up. For the rest of you, I know we had a lot of people that are from other parts of the country, and we even had somebody from the UK. Thank you so much for joining us. We greatly appreciate it, and we'll see you back in 2 weeks. So take care. Enjoy your weekend.
Thank you. Bye. Thank you all.